Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about the decentralized revolution, how the world is changing, of course, right before our very eyes. And you know, we like to look at it through the lens of both politics, or I should not both, all of politics, technology, and finance. And when you look at the world through those three lenses, in my opinion, it helps bring context to what all of this is. Makes sense of where, how we got here, what is going on, more importantly, where we are going. You know, and we like to look at it from a bunch of different angles to see how this world is changing. And one of the ways that it's changing is, as I say, is the decentralized revolution. And so the world that most of us know, that we've been living in for most of our lives, is really an anomaly throughout history, where we've had this continued globalization, if you will, where the world has become connected. Of course, the internet has enabled that. And so all of a sudden we can go hire people from Pakistan or the Philippines and, you know, Zoom conferencing and all those things. And it's really connected the world. And it's always technology that changes the world. But that same technology is also breaking the world apart at the same time. So there's this effect of this technology that's doing two things. One, it's connecting the world, but it's also breaking the world apart. But that's not exactly what's happening. The people of the world are being connected. The central planners or the governments are being disconnected. It's an interesting phenomenon to see what happens. Like I said, it's always technology that changes the world. And so I talk about this all the time. You can go to my main YouTube channel, Mark Moss, and just look under the playlist for these cycles. But basically, from a super high level, we can see about every 250 years, the pendulum swings from centralization to decentralization. And so roughly 250 years ago was the American Revolution, which was America and France had a revolution, basically rejecting centralization of the monarchy. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation, again, rejecting the centralization of the powers, the church and the state. And both of those were driven by technology. 500 years ago, during the Protestant Reformation, it was the printing press, the ability to have books, the ability to have information that changed the world. When everybody was looking towards one central authority of information, which was the church and state at the time, once the people got the printing press, were able to start printing Bibles, were able to start to read the information for themselves, they realized two things. One, what the state had been telling us was a lie. And two, we don't need them anymore. We can get the information on our own. And it did. It broke that centralization. The world moved into a decentralized world. Then about 250 years ago, we had another technological revolution, which was the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution brought people from the farms and the cottage industry into the cities. So it had this centralizing effect. And we all moved into the cities so we could work in the factories. And over the next 100 years, these factories got bigger and bigger. And in the early 1900s, Henry Ford, the father of the automobile, but also the father of the assembly line, created these massive institutions to bring the masses into factories, and everybody could basically do the same job. Whether you were really smart or really dumb, you could both sit on the same assembly line and do about the same job. And a management style was created to manage these workers, manage the masses as cogs in the wheel, so everybody could do their part and they could become very efficient. And because of that, we had a government style that grew in the same form as this industrial management style. And so we had, just like we had this management system to manage the masses as cogs in the wheel of a manufacturing floor, now we have this government that's grown to have these central planners that want to manage the population as cogs in a wheel. They want to boil people down to a line on a spreadsheet. In Italy, the new PM over there, what's her name, Moroni, when she took over, she gave a speech that was awesome, and she said something about they want to take away our identities. I can no longer be a woman, a mother, a daughter. Now I have to be person one or person two. And she said they want to take away our identities and make us just a line on a spreadsheet, basically saying the same thing. And that's how this management styles worked. But the problem is, again, we have technology. And so the internet has done two things. One, it's connected the world, as I already said, but it's also making the style of government that we have today obsolete. And we can see this in a bunch of different ways. We're seeing signs of this happening all over. And one I want to dig into today, which I think is pretty important, is this leak that happened from the Pentagon. It's been all over the news, but I think most people have been covering the facts of what was going on, but really haven't discussed what this means. right? So whenever we get a piece of information, we're like, okay, that's news. Okay, you read the news headline. Okay, information was leaked about the Pentagon. Okay, it had some telling things about. We'll get into what it was telling, but ultimately, what does it mean? Why do I care? What do I do with this information? What does this tell me about where things are going? And that's what I want to talk about today. So let's talk first about what happened. So we'll get through the data stuff. What happened? Well, information got leaked. Now, you might know that information leaks continue to get seemingly more and more prominent. We can go back to, Julian Assange with WikiLeaks. But of course, they continue to happen. So this DoD leak, this Pentagon leak was big news. Of course, we had other big news where the Supreme Court, one of the highest, divisions in our entire U.S. government, the Supreme Court, their records got leaked over something super controversial, of course, which was Roe v. Wade. And of course, we don't know who leaked that. We still don't know. We know that the Supreme Court also had really struck a blow to what California was doing with gun rights. And the Attorney General in California said, we're going to do everything in our power to push back against this. And then mysteriously, all the records of gun owners in California just got released. We saw a few months ago, the IRS had this strange leak where 120,000 taxpayer information's records were released, and they just happened to be for nonprofits that were mostly conservative leaning. Sort of like Operation Choke Point. Under President Obama, when Lois Lerner was running the IRS, and the IRS was being weaponized against conservative nonprofits. So we have these same things happening, these leaks that are happening, and they seem to be getting worse and worse and worse. And this leak is important for two reasons. And one, I think it demonstrates that the internet is taking away the power from these elite that are trying to control the narrative. But it's also being used by the elite to push a narrative that they need more control. So on one hand, it shows that we the people, are getting the upper hand. But on the other side, the elites, the powers that be, want to use it to gain more control. So let's dig into this a little bit more. So we can see, like I said, this information was leaked. A couple of things that I think were interesting is, one, the information started being leaked in January. And then more of the information started getting leaked in March. But the Pentagon says that they didn't know the documents were being leaked until like a week ago. So it just kind of shows how out of touch they are, which of course is part of their problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. We know that there was about 50 documents that were labeled secret or top secret that were released. A lot of these went onto Discord, which is a community site or app, if you've been on that before, or 4chan, which is a website that's kind of known for showing this kind of what they would consider maybe, black market data. But we know that these documents showed a lot of things that were sort of damaging to the United States intelligence community. Like, for example, that the U.S. was spying on Zelensky and uncovered a lot of things that they didn't like about him. And it had what was in there, so he didn't like that. We saw information that the U.S. was basically trying to figure out how they could coerce Israel. And some of the ideas they had to coerce Israel were, starting protests in their country, creating havoc for their president Netanyahu. We saw that it showed that the Ukraine's air defenses were running out, and they were very susceptible to an attack by Russia. Lots of information that was in there. We saw information about South Korean officials didn't want to send any more ammunition to the U.S. because they were concerned that it would be sent directly to Ukraine. Lots and lots of stuff. So we'll talk about that. But like I said, I really want to get into what does this mean? Why do you care? And how does this tell us what's going to happen in the future? That's ultimately what we're trying to always figure out, right? What does this mean? What's going to happen in the future so I know what I should be doing off of this information? Because the world's going crazy. One thing we do know is it's going to mean a lot more defense spending. It's going to mean a lot more censorship and control. And it's probably going to be very bad for the markets, would be my opinion. Now, I think we can all agree that the markets have been a complete mess. The economy is crashing. Inflation is still raging. But the good news is there is a way out. And so what does this tell us about this decentralized revolution? Well, as I was saying, it shows that this technology that we have is changing the world, and that's the internet. And what we're seeing all over the place is that the powers that be, the elites, are having a very tough time maintaining the narrative. And the reason why is because of the internet, because we have this collective mind. And that's why central planning never works. Central planning never has enough information, enough data. One guy or a couple guys or a committee of people will never know what the collective millions or billions of people will know. That's why we need to have free markets. So the market collectively can work together. Why we need to have free, open communication. So the market collectively can discuss these ideas, because collectively we're more powerful, we're smarter, we're more creative than one guy or a few guys or a committee that could do that. But of course, the powers that be want to maintain control. And so a few things, I talk about this in this Decentralized Revolution, and I've framed it up many times as the battle for the fate of humanity, talking about how the goal of these elites, the goal of these people that hold power today, is to install this digital panopticon that can control us, like this digital prison that we may never come out of. And of course, China is the test bed for that. China has been working on this social credit score system for a really long time, and they've been very successful with it. Now, of course, they have their central bank digital currencies, which are sort of like this last piece. And they've been blocking people's ability to move freely around the country. You know, you say mean things online, you're not allowed to buy a bus ticket or a train ticket. We've seen most recently in the last year or two, they're using this health passport, this COVID health passport, to stop people's movement. So there were bank protests going on over there, for example. People were trying to go to the protest, and now my passport shows red. I guess I can't buy a ticket. I can't go anywhere. And so they're doing that, and we know that the rest of the world wants to put this in place. And they need to control two things. I mean, really, they need to control, they want to control our movement. They want to control our ability to transact our money, but they also really want to control our ability to communicate, to talk, to have open communication, which of course leads to this censorship. And so when you see them talking in Davos, talking about misinformation and malinformation is the biggest problem, and then you also see them talking about a cyber pandemic. Of course, they're predicting that we'll see a massive cyber pandemic in the next year or two. I think within the next 2 years, they predict this. And so they're sort of using, if you will, like a carrot and a stick approach to get us to where they ultimately want to get to. I was talking with someone the other day, and I was explaining how I'm new to having livestock. I have a little ranch going, and I got some cows and goats, and it's been a big learning experience. And we recently had this little baby goat, and we were having to move the baby goat into the stable every night. And cows, I say cows and goats aren't like dogs, where dogs will come, but my dog doesn't come when she's called. So that's kind of a bad analogy. But trying to get these goats from the pen over to the stables has been very difficult. And we used two different things. We were dragging like a little bucket full of their feed that they love, and so they would chase the bucket. That's like the carrot. And actually, I tried a carrot at first. And then there's the stick, which is then I'll have somebody else, like my wife, come alongside of them and like clap their hands to scare the goat. And so we're using the carrot and the stick, or in this case, we're using fear, clapping the hand, loud noises, or greed, which would be their feed, to move them, to lure them into the gate, into the stable. And that's sort of what they're doing here. And so it's like this: there's the stick, and then there's the carrot. The stick is the fear. And now we're seeing here, it says the White House tells journalists that they have no business on reporting on the leak. Because if you do, this information is getting into the wrong hands, and this could be the end of America. Our national security is at risk, and you could die. Your family could be killed by terrorists if you do this. So there's that fear. And now, of course, we're also seeing them use it to their advantage. I think it was Emmanuel under the Obama administration. He said, never let a crisis go to waste. You've heard that saying many times. And now, of course, the Biden administration is mulling over expanding online surveillance after the leak. So, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, looks like we got found out, our data got leaked, and now we just have to crack down even more. We just need even more power, and we could stop this from happening. Some of the things that were in there, of course, like I said, Zelensky, we found out that the U.S. has been spying on Zelensky this whole time. We found that Chinese hypersonic missiles have a high probability of penetrating U.S. defenses. That doesn't sound very good. We saw Australia's defense chief got really upset, saying that he considers it a serious incident. A couple other things that we saw in there. We saw 5 photos of a printed presentation slide showing the training and preparation of the Ukrainian brigades. We saw other documents leaked from the Pentagon that showed that Ukraine's air defenses would be exhausted by May 23rd. Like I said, we saw how they were exploring how to persuade Israel to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. We saw CIA intelligence claim that Israel's Mossad intelligence agency had made explicit calls to action against, as I said, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, these are some really damning things. And of course, it all leads to more crackdown on information. And this really, it's a battle. It's a cat and mouse, if you will, where you have one side using the information and the internet to share this information, and the other side is trying to contain it. And it's really this paradox where a nation knows that it needs to have free and open speech in order to have education, in order to have communication, in order to have creativity, if they want to continue to have progress, if they want to continue to invent things like Starlink satellites or spaceships or, their yachts so they can go vacation on them in the summer. And they need this educated, creative society in order to get those things they want. But the problem is, if they allow this free flow of information, then they can't control it. And the people are going to continue to revolt and push back on that form of government. It's interesting. The internet, back to this kind of hive mind, this crowdsourced mind, it's that there's no longer this single source of truth anymore, because I'll see something on Twitter all the time where someone posts something where I'm like, wow, that was pretty important. And then I'll just start to read the comments and realize that they were wrong. And it's really brought down all credibility of mainstream institutions, and that's why we're seeing the New York Times and CNN and all these people lose relevance, because they're constantly being found out to being liars. As a matter of fact, just this week we saw two of maybe the most prestigious news outlets, both just kind of shoot themselves in the foot, if you will, got found out for just completely lying. And as fast as they're losing relevance, it's only continued to accelerate. The Pentagon leak that leaked a whole bunch of classified information. We kind of talked about what that was, but more about what it's doing is that it continues to drive these countries apart, and it continues to, unfortunately, bring down America's competence. Not only do we have leaks that continually happen over and over and over, we have President Trump, we have President Biden, Vice President Pence, all being caught with having classified information at their homes or wherever they have it unguarded. Stories of this are just kind of rampant, and it shows a couple things. One, I mean, if this is how they're handling the very most private and secret information, how do you think your own information is being safeguarded? And I'd say it's probably not. But this continues to just stoke the fires of this war, unfortunately. And some of the stuff that we saw come out of it shows the levels of corruption that are around these types of wars. Julian Assange, who, again, he was behind WikiLeaks, which is one of the the biggest data leaks in history as well, all about the Iraq war. He talked about the Afghanistan war as a way the elites were using. The Afghanistan war as a way to funnel money from the taxpayers and into their own pockets through a war. Right? That's what wars do. They get the insiders rich. And we saw information about that come out as well, the levels of corruption that were pretty crazy. I've talked about, and you might remember hearing about this Seymour Hersh in his article. He was talking about how. So first of all, Seymour Hersh is a rather old investigative journalist, when actually journalists used to actually investigate things and actually would write things that would sort of expose hidden conspiracies. I believe he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's won many awards for his investigative journalism. So one of the good guys. He's been doing this for a really long time. Of course, he came out with a story that he did his investigative journalism into, talking about how it was the U.S. that was behind the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, of course, he's been discredited. A lot of people came out, all the mainstream media press outlets came out against him and said, oh, he's just some reporter. It's like, he's not just some reporter, right? He's still arguably one of the biggest and kind of best known investigative journalists who's broken many great stories, like I said, award-winning. And so he was sort of discredited. They threw out some, half-assed kind of response to who really blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. But he's been able to defend his position with data and facts. Anyway, he put out another article this week that I thought was pretty interesting, and he really dug into the corruption that's actually going on in the situation over there. And he talked about how the Ukrainian government, and of course President Zelensky over there, how he was using American taxpayer funds to basically, fund the war effort, but skimming hundreds of millions of dollars off the top. I've seen videos online, and you might have as well, of high-ranking Ukrainian officials in their, very, very, very exclusive and fancy and expensive exotic cars, Rolls Royces, things like that. Of course, we know Zelensky, as was evidenced in, I believe, the leaking of the Panama Papers about a year ago, has hundreds of millions of dollars parked offshore. Like, where does he get hundreds of millions of dollars from, right? Well, this is part of the way. He's taking the money from American taxpayers, you and I, the hundreds of billions, again, hundreds of billions that the U.S. has sent over there, and he's skimming off the top. At least according to Seymour Hersh. Now, we don't necessarily have to take Seymour Hersh's word for it. We can just see that there's hundreds of millions of dollars in Zelensky's bank accounts. And then you would just ask yourself, where did he get those? That's certainly not his salary, being the president of a war-torn country. He was a TV actor before that, a comedian at that, and he certainly wasn't making that kind of money then. So you just ask yourself, where did that money come from? And I think it's pretty interesting. One of the ways that Seymour Hersh talks about how they're able to skim money is that Zelensky's government is paying for diesel fuel. Of course, it takes diesel fuel to fight the war. And we know that the Pentagon was paying as much as $400 per gallon of gasoline during the war in Afghanistan. Back to Julian Assange, that's how they siphon money out. And so the Pentagon was paying $400 per gallon for gasoline. And then what we know is that Zelensky is also buying fuel, and so potentially the Pentagon is paying him up to $200, $300, $400 per gallon of gasoline there. But instead of buying the expensive fuel that he says he is, he's actually buying fuel from Russia, the country Ukraine and Washington are at war with. And the Ukrainian president and many people in his entourage are skimming untold millions of dollars from American taxpayers that are earmarked for diesel fuel payments. Now, he put in his article that an estimate by analysts from the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, estimate by the CIA put the embezzled funds at $400 million last year. $400 million. Another expert compared the level of corruption in Kyiv, in Ukraine, as approaching that of the Afghan war, and said, quote, although there will be no professional audit, reports emerging from the Ukraine. Surprise, surprise. Of course there's no professional audits coming from the Ukraine. Just like there was no professional audits that came from the war in Afghanistan. $2 trillion was spent in Afghanistan. Now, when we give Afghanistan, we spend $2 trillion in Afghanistan, where does that money go? I mean, it's spent. It goes to somebody. You just got to follow the money. But, of course, there are no audits. Of course, we know the Pentagon has never passed an audit. The Pentagon can't pass an audit. And trillions and trillions and trillions, tens of trillions of dollars are just gone missing. And they're gone to people just like this, $400 million just last year. Now, it says many government ministries in Kyiv have been literally, quote, competing to set up front companies for export contracts for weapons and ammunition with private arms dealers around the world, all of which provide kickbacks. So that's how they do it, right? The money goes to somebody, but it goes to overpriced, overpaid contracts with massive amounts of kickbacks to come back to them. War's a racket. It says here, the issue of corruption was directly raised with Zelensky in a meeting last January in Kyiv with CIA Director William Burns. They said, the CIA director said, hey, we see what you're doing. We understand what you're doing. But what's interesting about this is he says, he told the Ukrainian President Zelensky, hey, I was told by the CIA, the intelligence official, that you've been getting money. And he was angry because, quote, he was taking a larger share of the skim money than was going to the generals, end quote. So, according to the CIA, a meeting was done with the director, CIA Director William Burns, and he told the Ukrainian president, like, hey, we see that you're skimming money, but you're taking too much. You're supposed to give more of a kickback to the other generals, apparently. Burns, CIA Director William Burns, also presented Zelensky with a list of 35 generals and senior officials whose corruption was known to the CIA and others in the American government. Zelensky responded to the American pressure 10 days later by publicly dismissing 10 of the most ostentatious officials on the list and doing little else. So he got rid of 10 people that were bragging about the money. They were driving around in their new Mercedes. They were making him look bad. They got rid of them. Interesting. Now, as this money is continuing being printed and sent over to Ukraine, that leads to inflation that just won't seem to go away. Now, what a lot of these people are doing, these central banks are doing, is they're buying gold. As a matter of fact, they bought more gold in history in the last quarter. And one thing that I've learned is that success leaves clues. If that's what the most successful people are doing, the central banks, they must know something we don't. And if they're buying gold, then I'm buying gold. We saw this week, it was awesome. On Twitter, which if you're not following me on Twitter, you should check it out. I'm at @1MarkMoss. That's just the number 1 Mark Moss. Hit me up on Twitter. I'd love to hear that you're watching the show. Ask me some questions there. I probably spend too much time on there, so feel free to reach out. But on Twitter, they use these Twitter Spaces, and Elon Musk had a Twitter Space this week, had 3.3 million people in the room watching live. Now, to put that into perspective for you, CNN, which used to be the number 1 news source in the United States, maybe the world, on like their primetime shows gets, I think, somewhere like 500,000 people watching, like 500,000. So half of 1 million. Elon Musk had 3.3 million people in the room at one time listening to him. And he was being interviewed by a reporter from the BBC, which is another global news source, respected news source. And what was interesting is a couple things. One, how Elon Musk is able to get 3.3 million people in a room at one time when no news outlet can do that. And so it shows you the authority that's being placed, how the narrative has shifted, where people get their information has shifted. But also, the head of the BBB was grilling Elon Musk, not the head, the reporter, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was grilling Elon Musk about actually, I think I have it here. I don't know, it's not that important. But he was grilling Elon Musk about, now that he's allowed this free speech and how there's all this information, misinformation, all this malinformation. Elon Musk has gotten rid of moderators and how that's such a bad thing. And he goes on to say something about, now there's so much hate speech and all these things. I see it all the time. And Elon Musk says, okay, could you give me some examples of that? Which, of course, he couldn't. And then Elon Musk said, so you're lying then? Basically just called him out in real time. I think I have it right here. The BBC reporter. Oh, yeah, James Clayton was his name. That's it. So, yeah, he kept pressing Elon Musk on these topics. And Elon Musk was just like, okay, well, give me an example, right? And he couldn't. He couldn't come up with one thing as he was making all these baseless claims, basically, that there was, after Musk's takeover, there was hateful content. He said there was, racist content. And he said, give me a specific example of the hate speech that should be censored on Twitter. And Clayton came up empty. And he said, quote, I don't actually use that feed anymore. And then Musk said, quote, you said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one. Clayton continued to avoid giving an example, but Musk would not let him off the hook. Then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about, Musk stated. So Musk said, you just lied. And so right there in front of 3.3 million people in real time, the people got to see exactly what goes on. You have very biased reporters making baseless claims that can't be backed up. And just like that, the emperor was seen to be naked, right? The emperor wearing no clothes. You have the BBC showing right there, perfect illustration for the whole world to see. Well, 3.3 million people, which many more have seen it now because it's now being talked about, of course, and the recordings have been released. But in real time, they saw how these news outlets trying to control the narrative just throw out lies. And in the past, people would watch those and take that as truth, take that as fact. They would believe that. But now in real time, we can just openly discuss it, openly debate it, and instantly find out that they are lying about that. We saw another piece this week came out, the New York Times, another well-known establishment piece that's put up on this pedestal of apparently giving us valuable information, truth, etc. Put out a hit piece on Bitcoin mining in Texas, specifically Riot blockchain, and basically, they put out this, it was a hit piece talking about how bad it was and how bad they were for the environment and how bad it was for the power industry and all these different things, all these claims. But the problem is they release it to the internet where instantly thousands and millions of people can debunk all the information that they put out. And it was all debunked. From the name of the town that they were reporting from was wrong. The photo that they used of the town was doctored. All of the facts and information, not all, many of the points that they made in there were debunked and proven to be false. And just like that, the collective crowd was able to take that information and destroy it. And not just destroy it, it destroys the reputation of the New York Times, just like it destroyed the reputation of the BBC. If I continue to lie to you, it's going to destroy my reputation. Eventually, you're not going to listen to me anymore. You're not going to believe anything I say anymore. And that's exactly what's happening with the New York Times. That's exactly what's happening with the BBC. And it's exactly what's happening with the U.S. government, which is exactly what happened in the Protestant Reformation when people were able to get the books off the printing press, the Bible, and they said, wait a minute, everything you've told us is a lie. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Everything is a lie. And it's exposing all this corruption. Like I said earlier, we were talking about how Ukraine has been caught skimming. Even the CIA says potentially up to $400 million has been skimmed off of that. And so now with this information moving around, they just can't contain it anymore. Talking about corruption, we also saw massive corruption coming out this week, which was sort of interesting. I saw the White House press secretary, Jean-Pierre, she's been being grilled asking, why is it that Biden never comes out and answers questions anymore? And she said, well, what are you talking about? He's taken more press questions than Trump, Obama, and Bush combined. That's what she said. If you remember when Trump was running against Biden, he called him hiding Biden because he was just hiding out in the basement. He never came in and addressed the press. You remember Trump stood there every single day just getting hammered by the press, and he would just deal with it. So anyway, they said, hey, why is it that he never comes talk to us? He won't take any questions from the press. And she says, what are you talking about? He's had more questions than all these Trump, Obama, and Bush combined, which, of course, is a lie. And it's not just a lie. The White House actually had to come out and make an adjustment to the transcript of the press secretary's gaggle is what it's called. And so they wanted to come out and they had to adjust it because it was a flat-out lie. Now, why are they trying to protect Biden from these press questions? Well, it's because of all this information that's coming out. We saw lots of news that have come out in the last week or so that a lot of people would like to ask some questions about, but he won't make himself. Like, for example, bank records showing millions of dollars in transactions between Hunter Biden and all these China firms. Or how China sent not so subtle threats to Joe Biden by revealing Hunter's bank records. Or how Joe Biden knew that Hunter Biden was on the Burisma board in Ukraine at the same time he was pushing for natural gas in Ukraine. And this is from the former Obama stenographer who says he has enough information, firsthand information, whistleblower information, to put Biden in prison. Like, this is stuff that we know. This is stuff that's already been out in the open, but now it's becoming very exposed. It's being brought back up. And of course, Biden doesn't want to make himself available to these questions, which of course is why he won't. And of course, when his White House press secretary tries to cover up, she is caught lying as well. So what do we do with this information? Well, expect for this to continue and continue to see the world continue to decentralize. And of course, we'll have to continue to protect ourselves by securing our savings, securing our purchasing power. And of course, I think that Bitcoin is one of the best ways to do that. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Mark Moss Show. We've been talking about what this data breach means, not just in context of the U.S. this week, but in the world and where it's going. And it continues to lead into this decentralized thesis. Hopefully that helps you make sense of what is going on in the world today and where we're going. That's what I got for you today. I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much. Until next time.